Good evening. Welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones, and answering your questions tonight, the Minister for Mental Health and Ageing, Mark Butler, the man behind the British government's Big Society, designed to reduce government and empower local communities, Philip Blond, the head of the Australian Council of Social Service, Cassandra Goldie, renowned ethicist and philosopher, Peter Singer, and the New South Wales Liberal Minister for Social Welfare, Prue Goward. Please welcome our panel. Thank you, and our best wishes go to Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer, who's unwell and couldn't be with us tonight. Well, Q&A is live from 9:35 Eastern Standard Time. It is simulcast on News 24 and News Radio. Go to our website to send a question now or join the Twitter conversation using the hashtag that just appeared on your screen. Well, our first question comes from Minna Bondell.
As a medical student, I worry about the implications of legalising euthanasia on my career and my conscience. I'm concerned I'll have to be taught how to terminate someone's life when the whole idea of medicine is to do no harm. Now, Mr. Singer, you advocate that euthanasia is a compassionate act towards the suffering, but isn't it just a quick fix? Isn't the more compassionate approach to help the sick through their suffering using appropriate disciplines such as palliative care and counselling?
Peter Singer.
Thanks for the question. No, I think the most appropriate approach is to do what is in the best interests of your patient and what your patient wants you to do, as long as your patient, of course, is a competent adult making their own decisions. And that's why many doctors in countries where it is legal to help somebody to die, many doctors will do that, using their conscience to make that decision. But if you don't want to do that, if that's contrary to your conscience, I don't know of any law in the world that is going to force you to do that. So I doubt that it's going to become part of a routine medical course if that's what you're worried about as a medical student. And certainly if you say, I'm never going to do this, that's entirely your decision. And a patient would then presumably ask you to see ask if they could see another doctor who is willing to do that. And I think that's how it should be.
Let's go back to our questioner. Does that satisfy you? I mean, it doesn't sound like you would ever, in any circumstances, be forced to do this as a doctor.
Well, I think one worry is when there's a law where we have to refer the patient to someone who will sort of do euthanasia. It's pretty much the same thing, isn't it?
Peter.
I think that's a patient's choice, and I think a doctor should provide information if the patient asks you for it. If you say, no, I'm not going to do that, and the patient says, well, are there other doctors who will do it? I don't think you should tell a lie to the patient, obviously. And if you refuse, and the patient may then say, well, I no longer wish to be your patient. And then I think the patient can find another one. If you don't want to say anything, I don't think you're actually working in the patient's best interests, but I'd respect your right to remain silent if you wish to do so.
Prue Goward, that all sounds very reasonable, put like that.
It does, and I think, the answer is that doctors don't have to do it. I think the more difficult ethical question is not for people who can choose to die, who make that legal choice. And I think this is what the baby boomer generation's worried about. It's when you develop dementia or a mental impairment and you can no longer choose, and instead you feel that you will be forced to live on and then die in extremely undignified circumstances.
So do you think people should be able to make a living will that they could be,
I think that's
euthanized?
what this generation of to-be older people, the baby boomers, are going to demand, because we are all watching our parents die in these numbers. A generation before, they would have died of heart disease in their 60s. We are now watching our parents die in terrible, what we would say terrible circumstances, and I think we will want something different. To me, that's a more difficult ethical question.
I agree, and I think that's
for everybody.
Yeah, that's
as a politician, though, you support voluntary euthanasia by the sound of it.
I can see that if a doctor has the choice to say no, and if that is a choice that a person openly makes. I mean, as someone once said, I will believe in euthanasia when I stop believing in greedy children. So there is always that risk of pressure being put on older people, but bearing in mind that I think we can manage those things better than we used to be able to do, I think we are going to get to the stage when voluntary euthanasia will be acceptable. But this other issue of the living will is much more difficult because, in fact, you don't very often sit down and contemplate those circumstances because you don't think it'll happen to you.
OK, let's go to the Minister, Federal Minister, that is. Can you, like the State Minister, foresee a time when voluntary euthanasia is quite acceptable in this country?
I can, but it's not the big story. I mean, as Prue has said, I just conducted about 40 forums with older Australians, about 4,000 of them, who came along and talked to me about what they want from an aged care system and a health system. And at every single forum, someone raised the question of dying with dignity or dying well. There's a real sense of unease out in the community that our capacity to control the circumstances of our death has become subordinated to this extraordinary technical capacity to keep people alive by plugging them into a machine that goes bing. At one of the forums I remember vividly, a retired steelworker stood up and ripped his shirt open to show me his "Do Not Resuscitate" tattoo. A week later I went to Darwin and a woman stood up about to do the same. I said, look, stand down, I take your word for it. She assured me, though, just in case she passed out face down, she'd also had "Please turn over" tattooed on her back. And at forum after forum, I had stories about little DNR tattoos. Now, this is, first of all, a very ineffective way to communicate your wishes because, as Prue and I were talking about, usually it's not about resuscitation, it's about whether you get a course of antibiotics when you get an infection and a whole range of staging posts between ageing, getting chronic disease and actually your last few hours. But older people have told me time and time again they don't feel there's a system where they can indicate their wishes and be confident that those wishes will be carried out by their family and their clinicians, and they don't think that there are good systems of palliative care out in the community,
so
which
briefly,
means that they have to go to hospital.
Right.
70% of people have to go to hospital to die, which is precisely where they don't want to be in their last few
Briefly, because I want to hear
hours.
from the rest of the panel, are you considering legislation to give people the right to die with dignity at the very least?
Well, a big part of our aged care reform package is to try and mainstream a system of advanced care planning. So, as Prue says, people can without tattoos, so that people can indicate those wishes before they start to slide into cognitive impairment, particularly dementia, so there's not then some family blue over what those wishes should be, and also to build the palliative care capacity in the community so people can receive that pain relief and that other dignity in their home or in aged care facilities rather than being trucked off to hospitals, which is what is happening now.
Philip Long.
I think this is all very worrying, and I think the question rightly raises how it changes the relationship between a doctor and a patient. Look, I think this is entering very dangerous waters, and we appear to be doing so in a way that we're not really aware of. What this creates, what voluntary euthanasia creates, is a class of persons for whom there will be a cultural force to say, yes, I want to end my life. Because as you approach the end of a certain stage of health, you begin to feel more and more acutely vulnerable. And actually, if you approach the certain conditions, which is how legally it would have to be constructed, where it would be permissible for a doctor to euthanize you, your relationship with the doctor will change because the doctor will be forced to tell you, actually, euthanasia is an option. And then you will start to feel the social pressure of, oh, I'm a burden on the state, I'm a burden on my family, oh, my children, look at how I'm suffering, it would be easier for me if I just killed myself. And the thing is, as people get older and more vulnerable, they get also incredibly polite. And the fear I have is people will actually start to feel morally they ought to kill themselves in order that other people are improved by it. And I think this gets everything wrong about human life. It gets our relationship to those who are suffering wrong, it gets the status of suffering wrong, and it actually starts to create a society in which the moment we owe something to somebody, then in some sense we should self-terminate. This is not a good society. This is not a decent society. Actually, it's vaguely horrific and genuinely frightening. Now, I do accept there are marginal cases, and I think your accounts are very apt and real, and there is a genuine sense. My own grandmother died of Alzheimer's in really a very awful way. But what was interesting is she still had consciousness that was valuable and was morally important for all of her family. And actually, it was very important for my mother and for our family over that very long process of dying. It brought us closer together. It was morally worthwhile for me. So the idea that people, even when they're in trouble, aren't sources of moral teaching for you, it's just profoundly wrong. Okay. And it's not a good society that does that.
I want to hear from Cassandra Goldie on this issue. And, you've heard, obviously, several different aspects of the same argument.
I mean, clearly, we want to ensure that we've got the right social services in place, so that when we talk about this sense of choice, that it is genuinely where an individual has got to the point of saying, we've done our best here, the services are adequate, but I'm at a point where I, with full consciousness, make that decision that this is the way that I want to go out.
But what if
I have a very,
but I
have a very personal, we all have very personal experiences of this. I have a mum right now who has Alzheimer's. She is in an aged care facility. I am delighted that she is receiving really excellent care. And absolutely, Philip, in our family, she brings a lot of joy to our children, and she never at any point wanted to consider that she would, looking forward, say that I wanted to take my own life. But I think we have to have this as a proper debate, recognising that individuals can make that choice for themselves when they are fully competent. So obviously the checks and balances are really critical here. Otherwise we do end up with a slippery slope because of the sense that in light of the inadequacy of the care available to me, I'm terrified of what that might look like.
And we manage that with organ transplant. We have very big teams around donors and recipients because there are similar ethical or moral questions. And I think, and it's not an issue we've confronted as a society before, because this is, a combination of medicine and this large group of baby boomers has occurred.
Well, as yet, we don't kill people for their organs, so I can see how organ transplant would...
Well, that's an unfair...
Well,
that is an unfair...
No, but the point is you're conflating two issues.
No, I'm not.
I think what is worrying are several points. First of all, people can feel very strongly about something and then change their mind. And there's something about... Think about any form of suicide. People undergo extreme mental duress and are fully compos mentis but profoundly depressed. It doesn't therefore follow that in full possession of their faculties they make a decision, it's the right decision. And so I just think we need to really be aware of the taboos that we have in our society that are long-standing and actually serve to protect human beings.
OK, sorry, Peter, just, I would like you just to reflect on this.
Just one comment. I mean, Philip was talking as if somehow this is hypothetical, this will happen, this society would be horrific. We have several societies that have had the open and legal practice of voluntary euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide for decades. Holland, as you say, Belgium, Luxembourg, and in the United States, the states of Oregon and Washington and now Montana allow physicians to prescribe a lethal medication. Nobody I know who lives in these societies thinks that they're horrific. There's overwhelming public support. For example, in the Netherlands, whichever party is in office, none of them want to change this law, whether they're conservatives, whether they're Catholics in office, or whether they're liberals or more of the left. There's just overwhelming consensus that they think that this is a good system, that it's done well for their society, and they want to keep it.
It should not be easy.
No, I'm going to interrupt you because we've got quite a few things to...
It shouldn't be easy, that's really the point.
It certainly won't be, because there are no laws allowing it to happen in this country. Our next question comes from Rebecca Lewis.
Thank you, Tony. My question is actually more about caring for people with intellectual disabilities, so moving away from the aged care spectrum. I have a younger sister with Down syndrome and she has very much enriched my family's life. And I guess the question, it's one for the entire panel, but how do we help the wider community understand what people like my sister offer to the broader community, and also how we can benefit by supporting these individuals, we actually become more cohesive as a community as a result.
Cassandra Goldie.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I hope that we've come a very long way down the road of not only wanting to have a society which is inclusive of people who do have a disability, but who genuinely overall see that the richness of the diversity of the lived experience is to be valued and to be enjoyed. And so we've been very strong in our throughout my life and through the ACOS in saying we must have, for example, very strong laws against discrimination, people with disability. Obviously, we have work to be done when it comes to making sure that the right supports are in place for people who do have a disability to share equally in all the opportunities, and the National Disability Insurance Scheme is obviously one part of that. And we were very pleased that we finally got political